library. For those of you who may not know me, because I see quite a few unfamiliar faces to me, at least in this room, my name is Kylie Bear. I'm the director here at the library, and I just wanted to thank you all so much for such an awesome turnout. I know that this is definitely an exciting program to see some of that history that exists right around us that we don't even know about. We're walking out right over. I just wanted to see, show of hands, who's been in this building since it's been a library, so since 2020. Awesome. Okay, great. Love to see that. It's such a special thing, I think, to hold this presentation in this building, one of the historic buildings right in our community. So, really great event. So excited y'all can be here. Apologize for running out of chairs. Hopefully, those who need to sit, we can kind of build some community, helping those who need to have some of that reprieve from sitting. But really appreciate you guys showing up. I know there's probably a lot to talk about, so I'm going to go ahead and start to pass it over to Dr. Luther J. Leith. He was the archaeologist who was brought on to the project of South Water Street. He'll be our presenter today, and I'll let you kind of go into your presentation.
Sure. So, the title of my presentation is Archaeology on the East Street, Tangible Evidence for a Great Town of the Saukies. I'm Luther Leith at the Historical Society. Some of you guys have probably seen me either working on this, or there's a bunch of lead line replacements and I had to monitor for a bunch of those. We're going to cover quite a bit of stuff today. I'm going to give you a lot of background to get us to where we need to be, and then I'll talk about what we actually found. So, if I begin, technology. There we go. So, what is archaeology? It's a unique discipline. We look at ruins of human civilizations. We worry about humans. We don't do dinosaurs. So, even though dinosaurs are cool, and I do think dinosaurs are cool, we don't do dinosaurs. And there are issues with Indiana Jones. Believe it or not, some of the stuff that he does is legit. It matches some of the early archaeology. But what we're interested in is human civilizations. Any human or ancestral human, so hominid. So we're talking about 4.5 million years. If you look at like all of hominids and stuff like that, or most of the archaeology here in the States is probably the last 10,000 years. So, what do? We dig holes. If you guys drove, most of our major client for the Historical Society Museum Archaeology program is Wisconsin DOT. So if you happen to see guys in high-vis vests lined up about every 50 feet, looks like they're getting ready to put in a fence because they're digging a bunch of holes. We're testing to see if there are any cultural resources in that area that will be impacted by that project. And then when we do find stuff, so here's us doing phase 1 stuff, just like I said, you drive down, that's over by Merrimack Ferry. We did a project over on 113. So you see us doing that stuff, and then if we find something, we're going to see what it is. And so we'll put in our units. So this again is on 113, and this is a young me and my wife working in Iowa on a project over there in 2000, way back in the dinosaur days. So we study material culture. We study the things, the tangible evidence of what people leave behind. So it could be arrowheads, it could be pottery, it could be, in a historic period, you could have glass, you could have ceramics, you could have construction materials, whatever it is. But it's the tangible evidence that people were there doing things. So why do we do archaeology? If you're in a university setting, a lot of archaeologists will do research. They're grant-based and they're doing cutting edge, looking for the oldest or the newest or the most fantastic. There's also legal compliance, which is where I work. So there's state and federal regulations that say, essentially, if you're getting money from the state or money from the federal government, or you're getting permitted to do the work from the state or the federal government, you have to do a survey to take into account what that project, what the potential that project has to impact cultural resources. And the intent is to protect the country and the state's finite cultural resources. So once the site's gone, it's gone forever. So when we do archaeology, when we're out there, when we're excavating, we're technically destroying the site. It'll never be put back the way it was. And that's why we have to be really meticulous and take good notes and take a lot of photographs and draw a lot of maps and everything else, because once it's gone, it's gone. So to get us to a little bit closer to where we're at, we were hired to work on the South Water Street rebuild. So that would be down here, from here to about where the new bike path is going to come across. And there's lots of resources. So this is out of our state database. This large polygon here, that's that huge one, that's 47 SK 357, Great Town of the Saukies. This one here, SK 706, because, I will get into it in a second, there were potential for burials in the Great Town of the Saukies. When they originally found burials related to the site, it was during the water main, when they put the water mains in like the 20s. So an archaeologist, to save a lot of people issues with Wisconsin Statute 15770's burial law, so they remapped the potential burial areas as the roads. So that's Sauk City burial site. We also have a little, this was a burial back behind a butcher shop. I think it was, it's over there behind like Jim Bar, that area on Water Street. There used to be a butcher shop back there. The butcher needed to remove a tree in his backyard. He started digging up the tree, and lo and behold, there's a burial there. And then 770 is a newer reported site. I think it's just a cache of flakes from making tools. 771, I'll talk to you guys about. That's a site that we discovered during the monitor. And then there's another site over here. It's a burial site. If it's got the BSK number, it's a burial site. So there's another one that's by Marion Park. But you know, in our Sauk City area, we've got just in Sauk City a ton of resources. So we were here. I was here under 157 because there was potential for burials. So this is Wisconsin burial law. It says it's illegal to tamper with or disrupt burials, whether they're marked or unmarked, whether they're pre-contact or post-contact European. You can't go to a cemetery and start digging stuff up. So because there was a potential for hitting human remains, that's why we did the project. That's why we were out there. So let's step back to understand the context before we get to what we're talking about and what we found. So a deep history of our area. There are 876 sites in Sauk County. Prairie Sac Township, which is part of Sauk City, has 45 sites, so that's over a site per square mile. It's 36 square miles in the township. Sites in Prairie Sac Township span the last 10,000 years. So we've got some of the earliest sites reported in Wisconsin, all the way down to, you know, somebody's farm from the 1840s. So if we go way back in time, the last glacial period was from about 85,000 years ago to about 10,000 years ago. Most of the North American continent was covered with ice, a huge ice sheet that was super thick in the middle. The glacial maximum was 16,000 years ago. And we're in a unique place in the world because the driftless area down here in southwest Wisconsin was not covered by glaciers during the last glacial period. It's one of the few places that you had glaciers, you had all these lobes of continental ice coming in. We're right at the edge, so we're right down here, but that's the driftless area. So at one time, all of Wisconsin probably looked like this. And then the ice comes in and it just grinds it off, planes it off flat. So there were people here. Get to that. So 10,000 years ago, the 10,000 years is broke up into periods and traditions, and it's based on technology change and life ways change. So people were hunting certain animals, they were making certain kind of tools, they were living a certain kind of life way, they were organized socially a certain way, and that's how we break the time up into meaningful sections. The things that we don't know is how did those Native Americans 10,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago, whatever the case may be, how did they identify themselves? We can hypothesize what languages that they used, but we don't know for sure what languages that they were speaking. And we have, in more recent time, we have some pretty good ties with modern tribes, but the folks that were here 10,000 years ago, the Ho-Chunk would say that was our ancestors. We know we got stories that talk about 10,000 years ago and continental ice and everything else. But as an archaeologist, I can't say that material culture directly relates to a certain group. So the Paleo-Indian period, the earliest recognized peopling of the New World. There's arguments that people came across a land bridge in Beringia, so from Siberia into Alaska and then down. There's hypotheses that people used boats and went along the coastal ice and down. And then there's other arguments that people came from the European side in boats. And there's arguments for and against. What we do know is people got here around accepted dates of 14, 12, 10,000 years ago. The glaciers were receding. They're primarily hunting megafauna. So here's just a picture that shows some of the megafauna that were out there. You guys, I'm sure, have seen woolly mammoths and mastodons. Mammoths lived on the plains. Mastodons lived in a woodland environment. We had ground sloths. We had short-faced cave bears that were like 12 feet tall and had like a 9-foot arm span. We had bison that had horns that were like 6 feet wide. We had armadillos that were the size of small Volkswagen cars. Everybody's heard of the saber-toothed cat. Oh, it's a scary saber-toothed cat. I would rather run into one of them than the American lion. The American lion was 3 times larger than the African lion. So people are competing with these, hunting some of these animals and competing with these other animals for space and to make their living. It's interesting, North America, the horse originated, it evolved and became a horse in what is North America, and then went extinct here and was not seen until the colonial powers brought horses back over. So that's just kind of neat, scientific. So Paleo-Indian people, there's 3 basic subdivisions. Clovis is the oldest, then Folsom and late Paleo-Indian. The notable achievements is they were using an atlatl, so the spear thrower, so they'd have their spear points either toggled into the dart, or they'd have a little foreshaft. There was an archaeologist that did experimental archaeology using an atlatl, throwing points at elephant carcasses that were cold in Africa. Their skin is like 2 inches thick, but they had the physicists with them, and they had a target. And the first guy threw it, and it broke the target. And then they made a better target with more sensors, and it's estimated that it increases your throwing force 200%. So it's that extra little lever out there with the atlatl that increases your throwing strength. Also during Paleo-Indian period, the earliest domesticated animal, domesticated dog. There's arguments that the domesticated dogs came across with the people when they came into the New World. They're all wolves. So you can get a little fluffy dog, you get a little fluffy dog. It's Canis lupus. they're Canis lupus familiaris, but it's still a wolf. So Paleo-Indian people, they were using a unique kind of point. It required really high quality raw material or heat treating and making the raw material high quality. This is a broken piece, but the key characteristic is the flute. So they rough it out as the preform, and then they drive a flute off of either side. And that was so that when they hafted it in, it would help with hafting. Folsom people, it's a similar technique, but the flutes were longer, and they could just, as it broke, they could just loosen it up and pull it out a little bit. So you see some of these that are really long, and you see some of these that are dubbed down to almost nothing. I was told by my advisor when I was in grad school, if it's over 2 millimeters thick in the middle, here at the flutes, it's a fake. That's how precise they were when they made their balsam ones. And then the late Paleolithic, they said, you know what, that's a whole lot of work. And maybe we shouldn't do it. And so they had the same basic shape, but then they just stopped going with the fluting technique. So the archaic period, so next period, so 8,500, about 2,500 years ago, there was fluctuating climate at the end of the glacial period. On the plains, there was a 4,000-year drought. 4,000-year drought, the altithermal. So it was hot, it was cold, it was hot, it was cold. So people are adapting to these differences in climate change. At one point, the prairie extended into Wisconsin, so you'd have prairie species like mammoths and some of the different bison that were available in Wisconsin that weren't at a later time period. These people were seasonally sedentary, so they would come out, they'd set up a camp there for a season or so, and then as resources got depleted, they would move to a different place and move to a different place. So they weren't living in one place all the time. Continue to use the atlatl, but then their focus is more on deer. The megafauna died off. There's arguments that I think it's a combination of the climate change that we're having and human predation and everything else that was feeding on the megafauna that killed them off. But there's people that say it's just humans. There's people that say it was just the climate. But the megafauna die off and they start focusing on deer. So their points get smaller. You start getting more stemmed points where they have like little notches in them. You start seeing what are interpreted as stone knives, so it's a larger biface that it's not hafted or it's hafted with a handle. Up in the UP at Isle Royale, people start finding copper and start cold hammering copper, making copper implements out of that, either and trading the copper. The copper from Isle Royale has been found as far south as Oklahoma, and over almost on the East Atlantic side, there's large trade networks that get established. They start making groundstone tools. So instead of chipping off and flaking, they would rough it into a shape and then use sandstone or harder material and grind it and make it smooth so that you can make axes. And then they also use grinding stones to start grinding different plant materials that they were making. We've got archaeological evidence dating back to this time that they were using textiles and basketry. They were, you know, certain things don't really preserve, but then if you get the right situation, if you add a piece of copper and a piece of textile that gets buried, the copper salts preserve the textile. So we do have direct evidence of textiles dating to that time period. An example of some of the points, these are Radix points and Dersch points. They're not the most beautiful versions. It's something we found on one of our projects. Again, people are hunting deer using the atlatl, and the points are much smaller. I don't have a scale on here, so you guys have to trust me. I'm not lying to you. These are smaller points than the Paleolithic ones. So the woodland period is a time of lots of change going on. The climate becomes what the modern climate is. People start messing around with plants and realizing if we pick certain seeds and we like that trait and we plant those and then we keep doing that and we select for a certain thing, you end up with something domesticated. They weren't intentionally trying to domesticate things, but before corn, beans, and squash, they domesticated goosefoot, sumpweed, sunflower, and a couple other ones I can't remember right off the top of my head. But there was a pre-maize suite of resources that the people, as weeds that were in camp, and they decided, hey, let's eat these. So they started farming, so horticulture into agriculture. They're living in larger communities that are more sedentary. They stay together longer periods of time. So a lot of larger groups during the woodland period. They would have a huge get-together during the summer. A bunch of different families would come together. They would build mounds, they would have ceremonies, they would do trade, they would find wives for their kids, whatever the case may be. And as winter came on, it's a lot easier to feed a smaller group, so you break up into families in your family group, your nuclear family or extended family, rather than the big group. But they would do that over and over. The big changes in technology is the bow and arrow and pottery. So the bow and arrow is not as powerful as the atlatl, but with the atlatl you have to throw it, and you might have another dart, you toggle it in, you gotta go pick up the other one. The bow and arrow is more rapid fire, and the points were tiny, so it took a lot less effort to make the points for an arrow versus the dart points. I mentioned ceremonies, trade networks. In some sites in Ohio, there is obsidian from Yosemite, there's obsidian from Mesoamerica, there's conch shell from the Gulf Coast, there's copper from Isle Royale. I mean, people were going all over the place. And you can make an argument that it was down the line trading. Somebody had it, they traded to somebody, traded to somebody, traded to somebody. But we do have some sites in Ohio where you've got a piece of local, like, deer antler, and somebody has carved like a bighorn sheep. There's no bighorn sheep around there. So somebody had to have went on a voyage doing trade or whatever the case may be, saw a bighorn sheep, came back and carved it. So we have a pretty good understanding that people were traveling, not just materials. And again, sorry, no scale, but here's some different woodland points. They starting hunting. They hunt deer primarily. Most of my stuff that I got here for South Water Street was deer, but they hunt deer. But they're also exploiting marine resources and lacustrine resources, so turtles, fish. They're hunting turkey, Canada goose. There's a wide array of animals that they're eating. Again, bow and arrow and smaller points. These are still more dart points transitioning to smaller arrow point on the bottom. And I have this one in here talking about hacking. So I talked about the paleo points. They had the flutes, so that they kind of sock it in like this. And then as you get into the archaic and woodland, you get some stem points and then the arrow points. And this is a really good example of the size progression getting smaller. Pottery is another big technological innovation. It helps cooking, it helps for storage. The woodland people were the first to experiment with pottery. It's very coarse. The early pottery is very coarse and very thick. And I got a piece of pottery here I can pass around. You guys get, I'll pass it around so you guys have time to look. But you have to be an archaeologist. I'm going to pass this around. You guys go, okay, that looks like dirt. But it's been fired. It's hard. It's solid. But it goes really thick and coarse early on, and then they get better tempering agents. The stuff you have to put in the clay. So when you're cooking with it, the heat and cooling that happens, it doesn't shock and just disintegrate the pot. So we get different tempering agents, and then the pots get progressively thinner and thinner. And in some of the late prehistoric pots, they're 30-gallon pots, and they're 5 centimeters thick, or 5 millimeters thick. They're super thin. They don't preserve well usually, unless they're a little bit later and they're more high fire. These people during the woodland period also have a lot of ceremonialism and veneration and ancestors and stuff like that. There's arguments that people were making effigy mounds as territorial markers. So if you're floating down the Wisconsin River or the Mississippi River and you see bird effigies and you know that there's people there and you don't have a kin relationship with them, you keep going. Or if you have a kin relationship, then you can stay. Because people are farming, all of a sudden land became important. It wasn't like everybody can just have land. If you're invested a lot of time and effort for farm fields and clearing land, you need a way to market. And so the best way to mark it is with your ancestors. So the burial mound, the effigy mounds and conical mounds, so conical linear mounds, and then the effigy mounds is a bird mound, and like a panther mound. They're burials, so you have your ancestors there. So you can say, this is our land, look, my ancestors were here for generations. And this is a recent project we did over in Mazomanie Township. And you can see here is the mound. I've got a couple of my crew guys up there. So we went into the woods. You know, they could be a couple feet high. Sometimes they're really dramatic, and you're like, that's a thing. Sometimes it's just like, you know, it looks like a little rise on the ground. But this one, topographically, was in a good area that you would typically find mounds. It was round. It had a little pothole in the top where somebody dug into it sometime in the past, or maybe a tree fell down. But so we got the mounds, and then one of the last pre-contact cultural groups are the Oneota and or Middle Mississippi, and they're two different kind of groups. The Oneota were living semi-sedentary. There's a lot of Oneota sites along the Mississippi River. La Crosse Terrace has got a huge amount of Oneota occupation there. They would build long houses like this, covered in bark or reed mats. They had some smaller houses also. They were practicing full-on agriculture. You can see here, these are raised fields. An excavation where they were investigating the raised fields. So you can see kind of the hummocky look. So they would plant corn, beans, and squash, full-on agricultural. They would hunt wild resources. They would trade with people on the plains. They would need bison scapulas to make hoes or bison tibias to make digging sticks. So they would either go out there and do a foray and hunt, or there's evidence of trade. But a lot of Oneota sites, you got bison scapula hoes and bison tibias, and not a lot of other bison elements. So it's more likely that they were trading for those certain elements rather than killing a bison. You'd expect vertebrae and other leg bones, long bones, and other stuff. And then where we're kind of focused today is contact period / post-contact or historic period. So about 1650 to the present. This is a crew we have out working in the woods. It's hard to make out, but this is a house depression down here that they're testing at the bottom. So this person's at a higher spot, that person's standing in a lower depression. So late 1700s, early 1800s, and then the 1600s, we had the first interaction between Euro-Americans and Native peoples. And Native groups during this time period were forced out, removed, returned, removed again, returned again. We still have Ho-Chunk here. They're still here. We still have a bunch of groups that didn't leave, and then there are a bunch of groups that were forced out and eventually ended up in Oklahoma. So that's the background. So now let's talk about Water Street. It's kind of important because the stuff we found there initially, I would think, would relate to one of the earlier time periods, but the material culture indicates it's more recent. So in 2023, we did our phase 1 survey. So here's our crew walking down the road here. They dug a hole where they could, barring any underground utilities or whatever. So dug a hole about every 50 feet and sifted through all the dirt, see if there's anything there, put all the dirt back in the hole, and put the sod cap back on. Our goal was to not look like we were there. We didn't find any evidence of a site, but the lead archaeologist on here did notice that there was buried soils. So there was a former land surface that had been buried. Either it was topsoil brought in for landscaping purposes, or topsoil that was related to when they put the road in, sculpting the road. But the fact that there's buried soils, and you can see here, you know, if you had a buried soil, that it could have potential for being below the road. And so the State Historic Preservation Office requested Sauk City to have an to hire an archaeologist or archaeological firm to monitor because of the potential for burials. So our site area was here. So it started up here at Phillips and went down here to about the trailhead, and we identified two sites. So we identified the Sauk City dump site, which is down here, and we found evidence of breakdown in sockets. So we'll talk about the Sauk City dump site first. It's related to the early Euro-American settlement of Sauk City. So we got bottles, pottery, a bunch of other, or ceramics, a bunch of other stuff coming out of there that looks like it dates to like the 1840s. So about the time that Euro-Americans were settling in Sauk City. So anybody who's lived on a farm out here in Wisconsin knows if you got garbage and you got a ditch, you put the garbage in the ditch. So as you go south on Water Street, there's a ditch right here. It's got a little drainage off to the Wisconsin River. There's a low spot. I don't know. Methods are what the methods are. Maybe you had a shovel test here. Maybe we had a shovel test there. We didn't find it during the initial shovel testing. Well, that and it was about 3 to 4 feet below the surface, so that's a little deeper than we normally dig. But during the excavations, you guys can see here, this color dirt, and then black. And so this black dirt is the midden, that was the dump site. And there's a bottle here, there's some ceramic here, there's a bunch of artifacts that came out of it. So glass bottle, ceramic, metal. The bone was cut bone, like steak bones or ham bones or whatever the case may be. So here's some interesting bottles based on the color, because with glass, historic glass, certain colors date to a certain time frame, certain styles of finish, how the top of the bottle is, where the cork went in, or it had a screw top, or whatever the case may be, are diagnostic. So based on the colors, it was from the 1850s to 1890s. We had medicine bottles, perfume bottles, beer bottles, including local Sauk City Brewing. You know, Ray, this is Sauk City, we have Sauk City Brewing. One of the interesting bottles that we found was, I don't know why this picture got a little wonky, I mean, it was squished, but it was a clay bottle from Apollinaris Burin, which is a spring water from Germany. So that was imported, but it was really cool because it was a complete clay bottle. And it dates from 1852 to the early 1900s. The ceramic fragments, based on maker's marks, you can see maker's mark here and here, and then the decoration pattern. The ironstone maker's marks date to the 1850 to 1906, and the blue transfer print is 1830s to 1860s. So all of that looked like that site was a dump site related to the initial founding of Sauk City by Euro-Americans. So it was kind of a neat site. But the site that most people came here to hear about, I assume, is Great Village of the Saukies. So in August of 2024, I had one of my crew members out here, and she calls me, and she's like, I got a dark stain, it's got bone on it. I'm like, is it human? She said, no. I'm like, is it deer? Was it a roadkill? She said, I don't know, I need you to come out and look. So I come out and look, you can see, this one isn't quite as clear, but you can see the light colored soil around here, and this dark grayish brown colored stain. And you can see there's a deer jaw, this I think is an elk scapula, a couple other deer elements over there. So I come out there and I'm like, well, this looks like it's a thing. Initially I thought it might be woodland period because it's got bone, it's got other stuff, but we had some other artifacts. We had a huge crystal trade bead. I was going to tell you guys, I apologize. I grabbed the artifacts, and I didn't realize, or remember there's 3 boxes. I grabbed 2 boxes. So I got pictures, but I can't actually show you the artifact. But we had trade beads, and we had some other trade goods that said, this is a late pre-contact, contact period feature. We excavated it, I called it the State Historic Preservation Office. They said excavate it to make sure that there's bone there, that none of the bone is human. So none of the bone was human. We excavated, we mitigated it. So we ruled out it was not SK706, but it's Native American, and it's got trade goods, and that made me believe that this has got to be Great Village of Sauc's. So the next day, my crew member calls me. It's like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I was ready to be done for the day, and she was like, "Hey, we got a couple more features." And I'm like, "Well, one was improbable. Two additional features. Again, you can see how dark it is compared to the surrounding soil, and you can see bone right there at the top. That looks like it's a C2 vertebrae out of a deer. And again, it had trade material, and it had bone, and it's a dark stain. And I'm like, okay, we got 3 features. It's got to be Great Sauc's. We should be good. The next week, I get a call again, and they're like, it's not 3, we have 9 additional features. So you can see there's one here, there's one here, there's one there, there's one there, there's one there, one there, one there. There's one back here where we're standing, and there's one just off this screen there. So I was like, well, holy cow. So this is at the Jefferson Street intersection. Again, improbable. We excavated them. One of them, I do believe it's this one, had a directional bore going through it. There was one here. This one was truncated by the water main. There was one that went on this side that was truncated by water main. So they were there, we didn't see them. People in the past, when they were putting in the water mains, because you're just hammering it out with an excavator, you're not going to see it. But because we were doing the final cut for the subgrade, so they had to cut this down, and they put 18-inch layer of gravel, and they put a 6-inch layer of the fine crushed stone, and then they put the road on top of it. They had to do this down cut with the bulldozer. There they are. So now I need a crew. Now I have to mobilize all my guys up here and excavate. So there's feature 1, there's 2 and 3, and then there's other ones. So, yay, we got a lot of features. It's under the road. Usually, as archaeologists, a lot of times we say there's a road there that all had to be disturbed because there's water line under there, there's storm sewer under there, sanitary sewer, there's telecommunications, there's gas lines, and the road. There can't be anything under the road. Well, there you go. And again, the next week, we got even more. So up here, this is Quick Trip. So right across from Quick Trip, we had a huge stain. It's rectilinear, partially rectilinear. That whole side is blown out from a water main excavation. And we have 3 other features. So the large feature is a house. The other ones are all what we would call pit features. So 17 pit features and a house under the road. Right by Quick Trip, what do you think would be super disturbed under the road? So I had my crew, when we were doing our initial work, just cut a profile here so you can see this is the modern topsoil, and then you can see a lighter horizon here. You see this dark, that was the former land surface. And so just to cut down from where the road is, they cut down at least 16 inches, so 40 centimeters. So any of the features we're seeing were probably just the bottoms of whatever they were. They had at least 16 inches that were missing. Most of the shallow ones, based on presence of firecraft rock and lots of charcoal and ash, were identified as earth or cooking features. But we did have several that were really deep. So here's feature 12. You can see that's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, probably 60, 70, 80 something centimeters deep. So, I mean, it was fairly deep. It was about 1 meter across. So I talked to some of you guys when you came by and were visiting me when I was out there. I said, this is probably a storage pit that's been reused. So you had a hole in the ground. You dug a hole, you stored stuff in it. You used the stuff that was in it. You got a hole in the ground. What do? You put trash in it. And just like everybody else, they put trash in it. So, but this is a schematic based on, I think it's Mandan Hidatsa out on the plains. But it gives you a good idea of how the pits were made. So they would dig a pit, and they would line the outside of it with some reed mats or something like that. Then they would take the dried ears of corn around, and then the middle was all shelled dried corn, and then this one they had some squash right in the middle. So the reed mats and this outside layer of corn would kind of waterproof and help protect the corn that was on the inside. At the top, they would have like a little piece of skin or something over it, and then a bunch of grass, and then some rocks, and then dirt or whatever. So you'd have to know where your pit was, but when times got lean in the wintertime, you could open up the top of the pit and you've got corn. You've got resources. So use all these resources, and then you got a hole that you need to put stuff in. So we had 2 of the features had very little to no artifacts. And they had a couple little lenses in them. I assume, based on some work people have done on the lacrosse terrace, that was probably used as a privy. So you got an open pit, started stinking, kick dirt in, keep using it, get stinky, kick dirt in, it fills up, then you're done. The other ones all had various bits of what was probably trash, or artifacts that got dropped in the trash pit. And yeah, so that's what we have for the pit features. So the house, you can kind of see here, I tried to get my guys to get it cleaned up and get a picture before the sun came up, so we got kind of our shade here, but you can see there was the old utility trench. You can see this that utility fill where it's the fine yellowish orange sand across this side, and it kind of came down here and went back like that. And this is a map that we drew. So that side right there would have been blown away, but it's roughly rectilinear, would have been kind of a square house. And then this is the profile, so it got to be about 10, 15 centimeters thick. But it was compacted, it was black, it had tons of artifacts in it. It had an internal feature here where there was a greater concentration of artifacts. These are a couple rocks. Oh, somebody's going to get in trouble because they didn't put key on here. These are a couple rocks that were mapped. And then this is a post mold, and that's probably a post mold. We just didn't get another post mold out here from where they put the posts in to make their houses. So it was large. It's 21 feet by 13 feet, truncated along the one side. And this is what mathematically the houses will look like. So this is an example of a Sac and Fox house of hewn wood planks. So you would have your post molds for each one of those posts that were going down in, and then they would either use mats or bark to make the sides in the roof. So these are all the features. My advisor always told me don't put just raw data up there, but I wanted you guys to see when we excavated, we recorded 15 centimeters. If you add that extra that was probably excavated just to get down to that feature was probably originally 55 centimeters. So we had one that was 70. If you add the extra on, it was over 1 meter deep, so over 3 foot deep. Some of them were fairly shallow. Even the house, where's the house? 17 could have been half a meter deep of just, that's the dirt that gets organic material from food and other artifacts and stuff like that, just trampled down. So that was the features there. So as far as artifacts, we had 4,002 artifacts. and they weighed about 40 kilograms. There was a lot of large burned rocks that skewed the weight a little higher. We had nine lithic tools, 9 stone tools, and that includes some points, bifaces. So you take your rock and you knock flakes off one side, knock flakes off the other side, biface, 2 faces. We had some unifaces where they just knocked the flake off and then they reworked the flake. And then we had some gun/striking flints. We had 90 pieces of debitage from making tools, 5 ground pet stone artifacts, 2 pottery sherds. I passed those around. There's somebody's probably looking at them. 10 daub fragments. I got this. You guys can check this out. So it's some burned clay. So when they made their house, apparently something in the house, they wove some wood together and then plastered it with some clay that got sun dried and a little bit baked, kind of like an adobe, similar. But some daub fragments. Most of the artifacts recovered, over 3,000, were bone and shell fragments. I have about 350. There's way more. We had samples. We have huge charcoal samples in there. There's like a big chunk of a log that has fragments. So well over 350 charcoal fragments. 122 fire crack rocks. So those are rocks that went around a hearth or were used, when they were cooking. 31 metal items. We had a large glass bead and several other beads that we got out of flotation. So I did bring these for you guys. So this is a bird bone bead here. This is a wampum bead, and I will pass these around if you guys can just get me the vials back. Please don't open the vials. But these are glass tree beads that came out of the flotation that I don't have pictures of because when I put the presentation together, they hadn't been processed yet. But you can look in there, and it's a bunch of tiny, this one's got a blue one and some white ones, and these are all blue. And then they had some slag, so it looked like they were probably doing some lead processing, and 1 small textile fragment. So like I said, I apologize because I grabbed the wrong box. So this is the front and the back, So it's just 2 points, 1 biface, 1 uniface. But you can see this is a Madison triangular point. It's a little less than 2 centimeters wide at the bottom and about 3 centimeters tall. It was like perfect. It was sharp. The end of it, if you weren't careful, would poke you and you bleed. So it was probably something somebody accidentally dropped. This one was another Madison triangular point. Again, a really nice point, but not pristine like this one. This was a biface where they're roughing out making a cutting tool of some sort that was broken. Those 2 pieces would fit. And this is a uniface, so this is the bottom side, that was the front side, that was the side that had the cortex on it, and so it had some edge wear along the one edge, from using it as a cutting implement or something. But the things that, all of this would scream, this is woodland. You got arrow points, you got bifaces, unifaces. But we got the striking gun flints. This one is British flint, Dover flint, and this is French flint. That's French flint, and that's a local variety. Sure. And if you look at the gun flints, striking flints we got, and you compare them to the striking flints they got at the Rock Island site, it's a northern Lake Michigan basin. I mean, these could have fit right in that same exact assemblage. So that means that they had some contact with Europeans. So the ground stone, these are hammer stones. So these are the rocks that they're used to smack the other rocks to make points. So they have a bunch of pecking, kind of looks like this, on the ends from where the battering, from where they would knock off flakes. This was a nutting stone, so it's got this natural little divot in it, but you can see all the pecking around it. So if you get a hickory nut, you know those are hard to shell. So if you just sit the hickory nut down there, you take something like this, you just go, You smash it, and it's done. Big black walnut, you smash it, it's done. So you can see all those little individual pecks from every time somebody smacked the nut to shell it. So these are the pottery sherds that I handed around. This is the dog that I handed around. If you look, this is smooth on this side, and on the outside you can see faint impressions. It looks kind of rigid. So the technique when they're making these pots is they'd coil it, make the pot, but they would take like a flat kind of paddle stick, and they would wrap cordage around it and pat it like this. So cord roughened, and then it was a little bit smoothed over. That way you got a pot. It's got grip on it, so if you pick it up, you're not going to drop it. Because you didn't want to spend all the time doing hot and grab it, and it's wet or something, and slip out of your hands. So that was a cord roughened sherd. This one is really small, but you can still see the cord roughened part of it also. And again, like I said, the dog was from something inside the house. And then I can pull you out, clean you bone, and show you bone. For the deer, we had nose to tail, head to hoof. Every element was represented. On the deer bone and most of the others, we had long bones, which are your humerus, radius and ulna, femurs, tibias. They all had spiral fracture. And so if you've got a green bone from a fresh kill and you hit it and smack it, the fracture is kind of a spiral fracture. If you want, I can dig one out and show you, but if the bone is dry, if the animal's been dead and it's sitting at the road, you pick up a piece of roadkill and you break the bone in half, it breaks just right across. So the spiral fracture means it was intentionally broke. It was intentionally broke because they were harvesting bone marrow. So they were using that complete animal to its utmost. So use the meat, use the hide, use the antlers, make tools out of it, get the bone marrow out of it. The second most common resource, I'll show you in a second, was freshwater mussel. So I have a bunch of valves, I have little bitty valves, I have little pieces, chunks of freshwater mussel. But overall, we had at least 7 white-tailed deer based on the right pelvis. We had 7 right pelvis fragments. None of the other animals we had any repeating elements. So we had at least 7 deer, at least 8 freshwater mussels, 2 valves. We had at least 16 valves. 2 valves make a 1 mussel. I haven't done the work on them yet to determine if they're all right valves, then we'd have 16. One bison, 1 elk, 1 black bear, 1 beaver, 1 bobcat, 1 coyote or domesticated dog. It was an element that is not diagnostic. Based on the size, it's either a coyote or domesticated dog. Elements from a wolf, elements from raccoon, fox, some rat, squirrel-sized rodent, cooter, slider turtle, snapping turtle, painted turtle, wood turtle, a goose-sized bird. I've got somebody that does birds and somebody that does fish that's going to come and help me with some of these, but the elements are kind of broke. But goose, maybe turkey-sized bird, a chicken-sized bird, a little songbird. We had at least 1 muskie, we had at least 1 freshwater drum, and at least 1 other fish that was not a muskie or freshwater drum that was probably the size of a cum. So they were using lots of resources. The metal items, I'll pass this piece of copper around. So this is a piece of trade copper. You guys can see that's the same guy as up here. So when Native Americans were interacting with Europeans, they wanted guns. They wanted metal implements like axes and hoes. And they wanted copper, so they would get like copper pails, and they would use the copper pail until it got a hole in it, and then they would cut the copper pail up into pieces and bend them around and make tinklers and jewelry and stuff like that. So the use life for European was, I got a pail, it's got a hole in it, goes in the garbage. The Native Americans, they had the pail. It took a lot of resources to get that pail. The pail breaks. It's still kind of shiny. You can make fancy tinklers and jewelry out of it. We had lead. There's some lead ore and some other lead artifacts out of there. So there's evidence that the Native Americans at the site were refining lead. If you think about Wisconsin, on our flag, there's two guys. And there's a bunch of ingots that the one guy's put. And those aren't gold ingots, those are lead ingots. Lead was a big deal. A lot of European ships were using lead as ballast, so there was a huge amount of people that came, Mineral Point was found as a lead town. There's sucker holes all over the place where people go out there and mine lead. But Native Americans were using lead long before the Europeans got here. They used it as a trade good. They also used it to make other things. So when I said that feature one, that we had a big trade bead, here's a big glass crystal trade bead. That's the wampum bead that I sent around. That's one of the bird bone. So those are bird long bones. I think it was either parts of like a necklace. Bead, like bone beads for a necklace, or like the bone, like little breastplate. But we had a bunch of bird bone, and they were cut and worked on the end. This one's broke, but you can see evidence of them being intentionally cut. This is a bear canine that they perforated and used as some kind of adornment. And this is a little piece of lead that I figured was some kind of lead spacer or other lead implement. So that's the bead I found. This is the bead from Rock Island. It looks like almost exactly the same. We had the wampum bead. Here's the wampum beads from Rock Island. We had the little lead disc. It was kind of a Morpheus shape. These are a little bit better shape. There's lead discs from Rock Island. So we were getting everything here at Great Village and Saukies that looked like the exact same kind of assemblage that we were getting for trade with the folks that were living in Rock Island. So prior to us finding these features, all we had was the historical accounts. So the first account, Jonathan Carver in 1766, visited right here, Saukies Chief Town. That's where we're at on the map. And he said it was the largest, best-built Indian town he ever saw. There were around 90 houses. They were organized in alleys and rows. They were made of hewn planks, neatly joined, and it was about 1 day's travel or 30 miles south of Portage on the Wisconsin River. So by Portage, and you kind of come down, and you find that guy. So it's been associated, the Sauks were members of what today is the modern Sac and Fox Station. We have Sac and Fox folks living in Tama, Iowa. They decided, you know what, the Europeans took a bunch of our land, so we're just going to buy it back. And so they've been progressively, as farms go under, they will buy more and more land. So there's a settlement of Sac and Fox in Tama, Iowa, and then the other band of Sac and Fox are in Oklahoma now. They were pushed to Oklahoma. The ethnographic accounts, the towns were regularly spaced, organized in streets with adjacent fields. There were over 400 acres of fields associated with Great Town and Saukies. The ethnographic accounts said there were 300 warriors, so we could assume if every warrior had a wife, there'd be at least 600 people there. So there's probably more like 1,000 or more. And he noted, Carver noted large quantities of lead in the streets. At one point he was like, the streets at the Great Town of the Saukies are paved in lead. And so the Europeans were like, well, that's where we want to go because we want a bunch of lead. Good thing is we don't have much lead in our yards anymore. So the next person to visit was Augustin Grignot in 1795. And between Carver's account and what was it, Carver in 1766, so this is about 30 years later. The town was deserted and had been deserted for several years. And Vigneault said that there was evidence of a few fire pits and posts that were left. So within 30 years of Carver visiting, they were gone. The next person to visit 1840 was Renthorpe, and he said, but how in this spot of land and surrounding country where we landed in the fall of 1840, all was covered with Indian hills, thousands of deer bones, glass neck pearls, arrow points of flint, and Indian graves everywhere to be found. Yes, they hunted, fished, raised corn, and died. Times decayed the bones. The new generation of children, particularly of Germans, have picked up their glass pearls, etc. to play with, and the corn hills have been leveled, and the village of Sauk City being located upon them. So this is about the time that you get the Europeans here, and that's, about 100 years later. And then in 1851, Stout noted that of the 400 acres of corn hills that were seen in 1840, by 1906, only 1 acre remained undisturbed. So that was all those rich fields. There was 400 acres of it related to Great Kawasakis. And in, 60 years, you only had an acre left. And then between this account, 1906, and 2024, when we did our field work out there, we had never had any archaeological evidence of the site being there. We just had the historic accounts. So a little bit on tribal history. The Sauk people were first encountered by Elwes in 1677 when they visited Schwamagon Post in Madeline Islands. That's way up north. They're closely tied to the Fox, and due to war and expansion, they fled to Iowa. So they started up way up here, fled over to Iowa. This is 1740 to 1765, so it's like 25 years of occupation right here is where Great Kawasakis is. So they were pushed out. In the late 60s, they moved down to Saukanaw, so that could have been guys from our town, 1740, 1765, and in 1784 to 1830, they were here at Saukanaw, and then in 1804, a treaty was signed, and they lost all of their land in Wisconsin, Illinois, and Missouri, and went to Oklahoma. 14. There was dissent in bands over the treaty that was signed, and this guy Blackhawk, maybe you guys have heard of him. He was chased he was down here, he was down in southern Wisconsin, on the Rock River, he was chased back up. At one point he was chased right over here by Blackhawk Ridge, culminating the Battle of Wisconsin Heights, and the guys from Blackhawk's group that survived went across the Wisconsin River and probably stayed for a short time in that old Sac Village, Great Village of Saukies, because that would be just right across. So, that being said, that's what I have. They probably lived more solitary, and then bison, oxen, talus, shorter horns, bison antiquus, shorter horns, bison, shorter horns. As they had shorter horns, they probably began living more in herds and larger herds.
He's got them on display up in Sac.
Yeah.
They were found below the dam.
Yeah. They were found below the dam right around the time that I was doing my undergrad stuff across, because I remember that the trip bison being a big deal. Anybody have some questions? Yeah. In the back?
Yeah, I had a question about the distance between cord roughing and cord pottery. Is there a
So, you guys?
Can't hear.
So the question was, is there a functional difference between cord roughen and cord compressed pottery? So cord roughening would add texture to the vessel so that you could grab it. Cord compressed, usually they had some kind of design with the cord compressed, so that had something to do with different groups or different people identifying themselves with the designs.
Dave, take it out of the room if you're just talking.
Yeah.
With the work that you did, do you have any sense that the Sauk Village, which you believe started around 1740, might have been built on an earlier woodland site?
I'm sure you're right here by the Wisconsin River. All the resources that you could ever want are here. You got all the river resources. You can go right in the uplands. You go a little bit out west and you hit the coulees and stuff like that. I'm sure that those. That's why initially when I went out there and I was working with my crew member and I'm like, all of this stuff looks woodland, except for those trade beads and those striking flints and the other stuff. And then it was like every feature that we had could have screamed that it was woodland, except for every one of them had some random trade good in it.
And they were in the same kind of layers.
Yeah.
Like the woodland was lower.
Well, these were all. This was all just. It was all dumping. I mean, the trade goods we find at the bottom. So it was all link contact.
Right.
You were talking about the beads, trade beads. You mentioned in the flotation sample. What do you mean?
Okay. So I explained to my parents flotation as washing the dirt. So for our features, if you guys were out there and you saw us, we excavated one half of it, and then we took all the dirt, just as like a big sample for the other half. And then once we got back, we have a machine that you put it in, and you have it in water, and it's aerated. The charcoal floats to the top, and is captured, and then the fines, the clay-sized and silt-sized particles are washed away, and you're left with sand-sized particles. So the heavy fraction, which is the sand and stuff, could still have some bigger chunks of charcoal, could still have some seeds in it, but it'll have little microflakes, it'll have small animal bones in it, it will have a bunch of other stuff. The light fraction, which is the charcoal, will have seeds, we have to make the assumption that if we find charred seeds, that was something that they were using and likely eating. If we find uncharred seeds, let's just say seeds don't really preserve for a long time necessarily in the soil if they're not charred. But I'm glad you asked that, because we did find one corn nixtamalized, like hominy, charred corn kernel in excavations in the screens. And then, just super cursory, because I haven't really looked at it, but the folks that were picking the samples for me said that there looks like there may be some more corn in another one of the samples. So we have evidence of them eating corn, which is kind of cool.
So you said not a history before finding other sites under Sauk or Prairie. Is that kind of unusual when construction going on streets, other places around Sauk or Prairie Sac? Nobody ever had a site come up and said you should come look at this?
I've monitored all over the state, just in general, lots of highway projects, and it's lots of nothing. I monitored 36 lead lateral replacements here in Sauk, and I could see the old utility trench where the guys had dug down in to put the original water line in, and didn't see anything. But it's here. It's probably in your backyard, right, for this site. But this is unique. There's only this site. There is a site that was discovered on Alaska where they took off the road. Shouldn't be anything there. There was a layer of clay. They didn't know what the clay came from, and under the clay was an Oneota village. And then there was another site. I think it was by Calumet or something. It's on the 151. Oh no, because I traveled so much on 151 one year, it was crazy. But it's out that way off of 151. They were doing road work. They pulled up the road. It's a horrible story. Dump truck got stuck. Dump truck's tire spun and a human skull popped out of the ground. But as far as I know, there's only those 3 sites that were found intact under the road. But this is a cautionary tale for all archaeologists that, I mean, I will tell you guys, I had enough time to come home and change out my dirty work clothes because I was up at Circus World today monitoring inside a building where they were excavating, because it had wood floors and we're getting bottles and everything else that the circus folks that were cleaning up the bear pits. You know, if you clean out a bear pit, you probably want a stiff drink. And so, you know, all of these bear pits, I think we've got 15, 16 complete bottles. And it's there's a brewery from Boston, Massachusetts, a brewery from Santa Rosa, California, and a brewery from Bearwood represented in the bottles we've had. Yeah.
Are you, would you determine that the actual village of the Saukies was in the spot that you excavated, since you found campfire?
We found a house,
Found a house.
and then we found the external domestic features, the storage features and cooking features related. We have 18 features that say that the people were here, and the time period and everything else looks like it should be Great Town of the Saukies. Now, there's supposed to be 90 houses, and there's supposed to be orderly rows and alleys. There's been a couple surveys. Edge Consulting Engineers did a survey on South Water Street, and they found that one pit that had a couple 100 flakes from making tools, and that's all they found. Like I said, I did all of those surveys for all of the monitors for the lead mines and didn't see anything. But I imagine if we could just remove all the houses and remove all the landscaping and look, we would probably find
Well, would LiDAR
more stuff.
help you out with that?
Well, LiDAR removes the vegetation and stuff, but it doesn't go into the ground. There are geophysical techniques that we could use, but it's a little, so if you use a gradiometer, magnetometer, and you have a nail, it'll wash out your data like a meter around that nail. So all of our underground stuff, so magnetometer probably wouldn't work. Resistivity, conductivity might work, and ground penetrating radar works really good for finding foundations and stuff, but not so much for finding pits or other things. There's techniques that we could use, but working around all the houses and everything like that's not super efficient. But it would be neat if somebody could do that, sir.
Here's a thought, the town of Trempealeau, the present-day town of Trempealeau is built over a much more ancient village. And actually, some people did give permission to have their yards dug up, so that they found artifacts and so forth. So maybe somebody here would give permission.
Well, I'm sure some people in this room talk to Norm, my guy that I had lead the project, and he knocked on people's doors because there was yards that we had to dig our shovel tests in. And then on that 113 project, there was a lot of yards there. You had, hey, we found stuff and we really need to see what it is. Can we dig big squares out in your front yard? And, you know, people are fascinated about history when they can see it and it's there and it's local. And I've knocked on a gazillion doors, and I would say 99 out of 100 people say, fine. Dig your holes, let me know what you find. The 1% people are just like, no, I don't want you on my property. And some of those guys are a little scared.
This was the first incorporated township in Wisconsin.
First village.
First village.
Well, you're asking a historical question. So I know the great village of Saukies, but I do believe
Yeah.
we were.
Yes, we were the first incorporated village.
Yeah.
The oldest remaining,
Yeah.
yes. The one that is still designated a village, has not grown, yes.
In your
Thank you
best
for,
estimate, as far as the house that you found, did it ever come across a question in your mind, how long may have they been inhabiting that particular house?
Well, if we went with the 15 centimeters or so that we found, that could be, you know, a handful of years. But if we add on what potentially would have been there, it was a generation. That was, you know, we know that they were here for about 25 years. So one generation of people, but it's just that extended family. Because I mean, it was a large house, so it was probably not just the mom and dad and the 3 kids or whatever. It was the mom, the dad, the 3 kids, the grandpa, the aunt, and the uncle, or whatever. They were all living in that house. Because I mean, it was probably a 21 by 21 house, which is really substantial for a pretty small house as far as size.
You're comparing the beads and the gunslips with another site. Was that site associated with a particular group of fatal miracles?
It was a contact period site, but it was not a Sauk site. I don't remember exactly who was the native group that was that site related to.
In your reference to the cross section of the pit basin,
Yeah.
and if this is the area that maybe represents a generation of people here, were these pit basins reused, or were they always dug once and then just used as fill afterwards?
So the storage pits probably were dug once as a storage pit and then used as a trash receptacle. They did dig a new one. Just usually when you get a site and you get outlocked, you know, there's been sites out in La Crosse where they uncovered the entire village, and so there's hundreds of storage pits. It probably is just an unconscious sanitary thing where you don't want to reuse that same pit because, you know, sometimes it'll be a little moldy around the edges or whatever, and you just don't want to, I would assume you don't want to reuse it. It's easier to dig a clean new one.
What are the theories around why it went from such a big booming establishment of 90 homes to abandoned for quite some time? Is it just generational turnover, or are there other factors that you believe?
Us.
Quite folks. You know, they left, I think they left in the 1780s, so we weren't here yet. So there are historical accounts that it was the Chippewas.
You had other groups that were being pushed out,
Us if we're Native
and then
American.
you had disease, you had a bunch of other stuff. Because they were originally encountered, what I say, up near Green Bay, and then moved from there down, moved down to Beloit, and then back up, and then out to Iowa, and then wherever. And it's the pressure. So when I say Europeans, it doesn't have to be the Europeans that are here. It doesn't have to be the white folks that are knocking on the door right away. They're pushing people out of Massachusetts, which are pushing people out of Pennsylvania, which are pushing people out of Ohio, which are pushing people, you know, all these people are getting displaced. So, I mean, the Kickapoo Nation were from the New York area, right? Yeah, so, you know, we have Kickapoo folks here originally started, their homeland was New York. So, it's the disease that were coming in, and it was the displaced peoples and everybody, it was the population pressure, and then, you know, just social strife and stuff.
So most of archaeological sites are associated with multiple age groups, woodland, archaic, and so on. So how is it that there was no archaic projectile points under the layer of the Madison Point?
It was just the Madisons came out of a pit, so it was a pit that was done by that group. You do get stratified sites in other places where you get, you know, here's your paleo occupation, your archaic, and your woodland or whatever. This one, it looks like it would
Just
if it did not have the trade goods, I would tell you it's a woodland site. But all the trade goods and everything else, well, trade goods in the large house. Usually the woodland folks didn't have large houses. But all the trade goods, and the fact that you get the trade goods low. You know, it wasn't like at Madison Point's low, and then in trade goods, the trade goods were coming from below the Madison Points. if the Madison was there, it could have been woodland and then a later occupation on top of it. It was just so mixed up.
So, when we hear about so many Indian villages and so on, is it possible that there were Indian settlement on the Roxbury side?
Oh, I'm sure.
Where
Yeah.
the Lycan pit is, because, when I came to the US 40 years ago, there was a huge collection of artifacts that came out of the Lycan.
I think on the Roxbury side, there are woodland period sites that had mounds.
Yeah.
And I think, I just showed you just the Sauk City area. If you go a little further south, than Great Village at Saukies, just on Sauk Water Street, there was a mountain site, a woodland site down there.
But yeah, there are a lot of mounds in this one.
Yeah. So you got 10,000 years of occupation. It's just hit or miss on who you're gonna find and who was living there at the time.
Leith, right across the bridge, there is another site that's been no one has excavated. 90s, I think.
Yeah, that'd be close to where the Lycan.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Just towards the beginning of your slides, you have the yellow map showing the Sauk City streets. And what did you say again about they were determined to be?
Okay, so big giant polygon is Great Village at Saukies, SK 357. The one that looks like weird checkerboard or whatever, it's basically the roads in Sauk City. And Ernie Bozart, he did some work here on on some other project, and to save all of you guys from, I would have put a pool in my backyard, all of a sudden I've got to comply with 157. I've got to get a request to disturb permit, and I've got to have an archaeologist come out. So Ernie redefined the burial sites, because the burials that were found were in conjunction with the water mains. So he just picked where the water mains were and made a new site that's the Sauk City burial site. The name of the site's SK 706 is Sauk City burial site. So that if Village of Sauk City or whatever needs to do road work, then they have to do the compliance. It tries to, if you wanted to put a pool in your backyard, an in-ground pool, and the State Historic Preservation Office knew about it, they'll say, you probably should have an archaeologist check it out first. But it doesn't have the force of law because it's recognized as a potential for burials rather than an actual burial site. So Ernie tried to save everybody a headache in Sauk City by redefining the burials as just the roads.
She talked about the map that had the big yellow area.
Yeah.
You're calling that the Great Village of the Saukies. That's the 400 acres of fields also.
I assume, because it's
The size of the...
if you had 90 houses and they were organized in alleys and rows, that would be the whole occupation of Great Village of Saukies is at least part of their agricultural fields and their village. Somebody else?